Hello and welcome to the banks of the River Thames here in Greenwich in London. I'm standing in the Royal Observatory and it has got quite a story to tell you. But Greenwich itself has a story looking to the past and of course looking into the future. In fact, this is where Henry VIII ruled England for quite some time because he used to love coming to what was then called Greenwich Palace. He used to come here for sport and entertainment to get away from the court in London. He was quite a jouster in his day, quite an athlete. In fact, this is where he had the famous accident, jousting, which is where a lot of expert historians reckon his character changed after that accident. In fact, his queen at the time was Anne Boleyn, and she is said to have miscarried when she heard the danger he'd been in. And indeed, she might have agreed that his character changed from that moment, because it was a very short time later. He had her arrested at her home here in Greenwich Palace and taken upriver to the Tower of London, from where she never returned. But I'm here at the Royal Observatory because it's celebrating its 350th anniversary, and they have quite a story to tell, because this is where the longitude of the Earth was established, the Greenwich Meridian, Greenwich Mean Time. In fact, you can come here and stand on the meridian. Let's tell you that story right now. It's an incredible scientific accomplishment, and there were some amazing people who made it. Let's find out more. Hello, Louise.
Hello,
Hi.
Anne. Welcome.
Nice to meet.
Great.
Do you know, I can hear straight away that this is a very incredible room, very special room. It's called the Octagon Room, yes?
Correct.
And you're the senior curator, so you can tell us the story of what the Octagon Room is all about.
Great. Yep. So it was originally known as the Great Star Chamber, and it's one of the oldest parts of the observatory that dates back to 1675. Now, at that time, there were new trade routes opening up across Africa, Asia, and the Americas, and European nations were keen to invest in better navigation because that meant quicker, safer, and more profitable routes. So in 1675, Charles II established two royal warrants, one to appoint John Flamsteed as a new Astronomer Royal, and another one to appoint Charles Wren to build this magnificent new observatory.
Ah, so this was a Wren building. It's Flamsteed, who was the first Astronomer Royal.
Correct.
And they created this octagonal room, I suppose, so that they could just have 360-degree looks at the world.
Absolutely. We're situated on top of a hill, so you've got fantastic views of the horizon. So that's great for observing the stars as they rise in the east and set in the west. And at that time, this would have been surrounded by meadows and fields. So perfect, away from all the smoky skies of London, but you've still got access via the river.
That's right. Tell me about this man then. He must have been extraordinary. He was the first Astronomer Royal, John Flamsteed.
That's right, yes, he came from Derby. He'd sort of made a name for himself within the Royal Society as an accomplished astronomer and observer. In late 1674, an astronomer came over from Paris, claiming that he'd improved this navigation technique, and Flamsteed was asked to check his claims. He disproved them, but then that really set him up then to become this new Astronomer Royal at this new observatory.
So this was his little fiefdom, really?
Exactly.
This is where he lived and worked?
Yes, so you have observations up here, and then you have a series of dwelling rooms downstairs.
Yeah, in fact, they look quite cute and small, don't they?
Quite cosy, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes, because it would just been Flamsteed and perhaps one or two assistants, and that's all.
So apart from his work, which was extraordinary, his life just sort of looks just ordinary guy, really. You wouldn't have been able, if you'd bumped into him in the street, you wouldn't have known.
Exactly, just a well-educated man, perhaps wearing clerical dress, but yes, nothing particularly extraordinary.
So what did he achieve? Because you need to explain to us, if you can, what the world was like. I mean, literally what the globe was like before he came along and sort of regulated it.
Yes, so he really wanted to produce better star charts to help prove navigation at sea. And for that, you need accurate timekeepers. So timekeeping was very important to him, and he started to develop what we call Greenwich Mean Time, GMT. So you take observations of the sun, as seen here at Greenwich, and over time, you'll notice that they sort of vary slightly. So he smoothed them out to create an average or mean day of exactly 24 hours, which is perfect for keeping track of with a clock or a watch.
Because until then, everybody, wherever you lived in the world, even wherever you lived in Britain, you had your own time.
Exactly, you were just dependent on your local time from the sun. And if you lived and worked in the same area, that was perfectly adequate. That's all you needed.
I mean, I used to live in Oxford, and they always used to boast about how they were either 5 minutes behind or 5 minutes in front of this time here in Greenwich.
Exactly. So across the UK, it varies by about half an hour. So if you went to Liverpool, your clocks would be about 12 minutes behind, say Greenwich, but in Norwich, they'd be about 4 or 5 minutes ahead.
Now, that's all very quaint in those days, but it meant that it must have been impossible to travel, for instance. You wouldn't know when you were going to arrive anywhere because time was only local.
Exactly. But I guess if so few people travelled or needed to know that it wasn't really a problem. It was more about knowing how much daylight you had to complete your tasks.
So what was he able to do? Because before Greenwich Mean Time, there were lots of different meridians all over the world, all over Britain even.
Well, each observatory would have its own meridian. This is an imaginary line that goes from the North to the South Pole that you can use as a reference. And this is really crucial for doing your accurate measurements.
So he had the Greenwich Meridian, but somewhere along the line there was a meeting of all the great brains, and they decided that the Greenwich Meridian should be the one that is sort of naught.
Yes, so by the late 1800s, there were about 12 observatories around the world that had their own meridian, and this was reflected in their maps and their charts. So, for example, if you bought a map from Brazil, then 0 degrees longitude would go through the observatory at Rio de Janeiro. And then if you bought one in Russia, it would go through St. Petersburg. How on earth can you coordinate international travel and trade when you're not using the same coordinate system? So eventually there was this big conference in 1884 to choose one meridian that everyone could refer to. And it came down to a very pragmatic choice. The majority of shipping companies were already using British charts and maps based on the Greenwich Meridian. So it made the most sense to choose the one that people were using already.
That's what makes him a truly historic figure.
It's an incredible legacy, isn't it? Yes.
Absolutely astonishing. We've got some beautiful clocks over there, and I know they're part of his story too.
Yes, absolutely. You can't do astronomy without good clocks. So when the observatory was built, Thomas Tompion, the best clockmaker in London, was commissioned to produce these clocks here. And they have two main features to make them the most accurate clocks of their time. First of all, they have very long pendulums that extend right up behind the wall.
So the bob on the pendulum is the golden orb we can see there.
Yeah, that's right.
But the pendulum itself goes right up to the top.
Yes, about 13 feet or 4 meters. So this makes them very accurate.
So the longer the pendulum, the more accurate the timepiece.
Correct, yes. It also has very heavy driving weights. This makes it very steady, and it only needs winding once a year, whereas most clocks at that time would have been wound once a week or so. So the less you have to sort of interfere with the movement, the more stable it is and the more accurate it is.
So he had these designed. They're very beautiful timepieces,
they are, aren't they? Yeah. So this is really where sort of GMT really starts to come to fruition. These clocks here are actually replicas because when Flamsteed died, his wife Margaret took them out because they belonged to her. They were her property. Luckily, we've managed to recover one of them here, and there's another one at the British Museum as well.
So when he first built these clocks, and when he first set them, they would have been set at 12 midday when the sun was over the meridian here in Greenwich.
Yes,
I've got that right?
Sort of. So you can use the sun crossing the meridian as a measure of your noon. That's your local time. And then if you do that every day repeatedly for a year, you can then smooth it out to create this average or mean time. And then that creates your perfect day of 24 hours.
So these three beautiful clocks, they've got the pendulums going all the way up there, and they, when in their day, would have been the most accurate of all.
Yes, and it's even been claimed that the whole room was designed around these clocks because you need these high walls to accommodate the pendulums. If you look up, you can see that we're reminded of our royal patron. So you have CR for Charles Rex, Charles II.
Yes.
And then we've also got these entwined Cs for Charles and his wife Catherine of Braganza. So, you have to always remember who the boss is and who's paying the bills.
Well, that's right. In fact, this was built on royal land, wasn't it?
Exactly, yes.
Which is why they were presumably able to build it so fast.
Exactly.
It only took one man to make the decision.
Yes, free land, yes.
And if we go over here, you've got what the original clocks works, the
Yes.
original clockwork would have
Yep.
looked like.
So one of the original movements that was recovered from a stately home up in Norfolk, and I just love all the detail and the design in the hands.
So intricate.
It's a work of art.
they are works of art, aren't they?
Yeah, almost sort of sculptures. This one's been modified slightly to make it into a domestic clock, but it's just nice to bring it home.
Yes, it is. Okay, so this room, as we see it now, and as we hear it, would it have been like this in Flamsteed's time? Or would there have been more clutter and more bits and pieces of, I don't know, what did they work on?
It's interesting. It was a bit of a shame because when Wren designed it, he used the foundations of an old medieval castle that was here, which makes perfect sense architecturally, but for astronomy, it wasn't so helpful because the whole building is actually askew from the meridian by about 13.5 degrees.
That's a bit unfortunate.
Yes, so this is perfect for observing, say, temporary events like comets or the planets. You might use this instrument here to measure how
quadrant, yeah.
how high things are in the sky, but it was used more for entertaining and for receiving guests.
Because Flamsteed wouldn't have liked it. It was 13.5 degrees out.
Exactly. So unfortunately, he had to set up a separate building a few metres away. That's really where he did his main mapping.
Yeah, I mean, you've based what we see now on an old drawing of how it would have been in his time, with the quadrant here looking out of one window. And this, amazingly, well, it looks very basic, sort of telescope.
It is, isn't it? Yes. So the telescope emerged around 1607 when people started to combine lenses to try and magnify objects at a distance. And astronomers started to use these new instruments to look at the stars, most famously Galileo. But there was a problem. A lot of the lenses had sort of colour distortion at this time. So one solution around this was to try and increase the distance between the focal point and the lens. So if you look at images of telescopes from the 1600s, they're very long.
They're very long.
Yeah, really unwieldy. You have to use these ladders and poles.
And you have to sit down low.
Yes.
Is there anything up there? Oh, there is something.
What can you see?
I can see Saturn. That can't be real.
Just to give an impression.
Oh, it's lovely.
But it's very popular with the kids.
Oh,
absolutely.
Bet, yes.
Yeah.
So this would have been there looking like that. Very,
Yeah.
very basic.
And then thankfully then in the 1750s, opticians developed better lenses with different shapes and different combinations of ingredients that sort of minimise the colour distortion. And then you start to get more compact and more powerful telescopes.
Well, that leads us to what we can see out of this window here.
Yeah.
And that is the, what do you call it, the onion dome or something?
Yes, this is our great equatorial dome. We'll see the telescope later. But yeah, really a sort of giant leap from these early telescopes into something much bigger, more complex, and something that can be used for astrophotography as well.
Would that have been, that wouldn't have been here in Flamsteed's time?
No, this is much later from the 1890s.
But very much based on his legacy.
Yeah.
We'll see that later, yes?
Absolutely, yeah.
A lot of what we're going to see here now is about the quest for longitude. We had latitude already, didn't we?
We did, yes, but longitude, or your east-west position, was really difficult to measure out at sea. And that really was the heart of the work here at the observatory for the first 2 centuries or so. So let's go and find out more.
Isn't it lovely as well that Greenwich is the centre? It's where time began.
Absolutely.
It's where time still begins. Okay, Louise, we're going to see the coolest globe. The coolest globe I've ever seen. And it's this magnificent one which helps explain longitude.
Definitely. So this globe really illustrates the challenge or the problem of trying to work out your longitude. Mariners out at sea could work their latitude or north-south position relative to the equator.
By using a quadrant to look at the stars?
Yep, so you can use either a cross staff or these sort of angle measuring instruments. So you can measure the sun during the day or the North Star at night. That gives you your latitude. But for longitude or your east-west position, it's really impossible. Where does longitude begin and end on a sphere? There's no natural equivalent to the equator. So astronomers and mathematicians try to develop different techniques. One idea was that if you're out at sea, you could measure your position relative to the moon, see how the moon appears in the sky, and then you would consult a book that tells you how someone else would see the moon, say at Greenwich or Paris or wherever, and then you use the comparison to work out your longitudes.
Yes.
Now this all relates to rotation. We saw those clocks in the Octagon Room that Flamsteed used for measuring the Earth's rotation. So we've got 360 degrees turning in 24 hours.
Yes.
So every hour, the Earth is turning 15 degrees.
So there are 24 meridians.
Not especially, but you could do in theory. Yeah. So the idea is that if you have a 3-hour time difference, then you've got a longitude difference of 45 degrees.
Yeah. So it's up to the mathematicians to decide that.
Exactly.
But here we can so plainly see the Greenwich Meridian, the Prime Meridian, going through the UK there, just through Greenwich.
Yeah.
Where else does it go?
Goes through France, a little bit of Spain, Algeria, Mali, down here, down to Ghana, and then across over the ocean and right down to the Antarctic.
And what you can see with this globe is that that's the time at the Greenwich Meridian.
Yep, this is Greenwich Mean Time, and then you can see that the hours are plus 1, 2, 3, 4 on that side, or minus on this side.
I see. That actually shows it so simply. I mean, simply, but it was very complicated, but now we understand it.
Yep. The other option was to take a timekeeper with you. So you set your clock, say, to London time or Greenwich time when you leave port, and then when you're out at sea, you measure local time from the sun and see from your clock what time it is back home at Greenwich or wherever you've
So
left.
seafaring was very much about taking a scientist with you, or at least a mathematician.
You have to be very aware of where you are on the planet, what can you see in the sky, how far have I travelled. It's really impressive.
And once they'd agreed longitude, there had to be an act of Parliament to say this is how it's going to be from now on.
Well, there were many different ways of trying to determine longitudes. And then in 1714, people said we really need to invest in this to make it happen. It was still too uncertain trying to measure it at sea. So the British government offered a financial reward of £20,000.
Wow, which must have been a fortune in those
millions,
days.
an absolute life-changing sum of money in 1714. As you can imagine, there were some weird and wacky ideas suggested, but it gradually narrowed down to either using astronomy, particularly the moon, or using some sort of timekeeper that could keep time at sea.
Yeah, it was quite a difficult business, seafaring, wasn't it? Especially if it was long journeys. I mean, we know how they used to measure latitude. They'd already sort of perfected that. But an awful lot depended on wind and speed and how would you know?
Yep, very dependent on a technique called dead reckoning, where you're using an estimation of how far you've travelled and which direction you've taken, perhaps using a magnetic compass or using an instrument called a log reel, where you're putting out a piece of wood on a rope that has a series of knots in it, and from that you can calculate your speed.
And that is why we talk about speed as knots.
Exactly.
There are so many everyday phrases that come from seafaring.
Really is. It's embedded within our culture, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Whether it's clearing the decks or...
But this is one brilliant globe, isn't it? You could look at it all day.
Yeah,
it's fabulous.
fascinating.
Let's go and find out a bit more about this act of Parliament that regulated it. So apparently this amazing reward sparked a frenzy amongst certain people, didn't it? We've even got a cartoon of people going mad about it.
Yes.
But then I love this as well. This is saying an act for providing a public reward for such personal persons as shall discover the longitude at sea. And that's how important it was.
Yes, this was the last act that Queen Anne signed before she died. And there was a lot of chatter in all the coffee shops in London. There were some weird and wonderful ideas proposed, but it really must have been quite an exciting time. A lot of innovation and ideas, just like some of our current challenges today.
So tell us about this man Harrison, who's another life I'm absolutely besotted with, because he wasn't a scientist, was he?
That's right. So John Harrison, born in Yorkshire but grew up in Lincolnshire, was a carpenter turned clockmaker. And he was convinced that he could design a clock that could be used as a reference timekeeper at sea. He came here to the observatory in the late 1720s, had a chat with Halley, who was by then the second Astronomer Royal.
Yes, and that's Halley who discovered the comet.
Exactly,
Wow.
exactly. Now, Halley wasn't a clockmaker himself, but he realised that this was a good idea, and so he introduced Harrison to George Graham, who was sort of Tompion's successor as the best
So he was the
clockmaker.
master clockmaker.
Exactly.
But, I mean, this is Harrison's first design. I mean, it's beautiful to look at, but what's it doing?
It's trying to address three main challenges. The first is motion. As you can imagine, a pendulum on a rocking ship is not going to work.
No.
So Harrison converted that into this sort of dumbbell spring bar balance system instead. The The second challenge is temperature. What if you're going from London to the Caribbean, to somewhere cold? Your clock is going to speed up and slow down in temperature variation. So if you look in the middle, you can just see there's a set of rods, metal rods.
Oh, yes.
Like a sort of tray. These are made of brass and steel, and they expand and contract at complementary rates.
Yes.
Cancel out.
That's clever.
It's really ingenious. And then finally, Harrison used his knowledge of wood from his carpentry days to choose a tropical hardwood called lignum vitae.
Yes, there's wood in there.
That secretes its own natural oils. So the big cogs are made of oak, and then there are tiny, tiny components made of this tropical hardwood. And it doesn't need oiling, which is perfect if you're going on a long voyage.
Because it's got its own natural oils.
Yep, yep.
It looks wonderful, but it worked.
It is. It still works. We wind it daily, and we don't need to oil it either. It's still working.
So you wind it every day.
Yeah.
That's what we call clockwork. Is it? It just gives
Just
it.
wind.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's sensational. But that was only his first design.
Yes.
What else did he come up with?
So then he opted for a second design in the 1730s. This is what we now call H2, his second device. And the main innovation here was the addition of an extra spring called a remontoire that adds in extra energy to keep it flowing nice and steadily, nice and consistent. It's still quite big and chunky.
Well, it's more compact than the last one.
It is, yeah. Yeah.
So he's obviously developing all the time.
Yeah.
Very clever man.
So then he starts work on a third timekeeper, H3, and this really troubles him. He spends about nearly 20 years working on this, constantly trying to improve it. This time he switched from those dumbbells into a more circular wheel, so that again, keeping it nice and stable. He's also changed that temperature compensation from those rods into this sort of violin-shaped piece at the top.
Yes, that's it.
So this has got two pieces of brass and steel welded together that, again, expand and contract. So that's similar to the bimetallic strip that you have in your kettle or your toaster in the morning.
Yeah.
And then round the back, he added in these roller bearings to make it run nice and smooth.
What's so incredible is that I can understand the functionality of it, and he was obviously thinking that when he would start designing it, but there's such a beauty to it as well. And again, was it any good at sea? Did it work?
No, this wasn't actually tried at sea after all that effort. He did win an award, a medal from the Royal Society, but it just still wasn't good enough.
Did he ever get the £20,000?
Sort of, yes. If you add up all the money that he was awarded by the Board of Longitude over his whole lifespan, then yes, I think it comes to about £23,000.
Yeah, but that's not the same as prize money, is it?
No, exactly. He would argue that most of that was spent on development, on actually building the machines. So yeah, it's debatable.
But you can see that he lived for his work.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful.
And then, for reasons slightly unknown, in the early 1750s, he changed his approach completely. The conventional wisdom of the day was that watches were not reliable or accurate enough for use for longitude at sea. They were designed to be very small and very light. So Harrison sort of turned that thinking on its head and made a watch that was big and had heavy components, but also beat very fast, about 5 times a second.
5 times a second?
Yeah, yeah.
In those days?
And it has these sort of jewelled bearings as well. And it performed exceptionally well. So he proposed it to the Board of Longitude, and another one was built and taken to sea, taken out to Jamaica and Barbados, and it performed brilliantly. It only lost 39.2 seconds in 47 days.
My goodness.
Absolutely incredible. Now, technically, that was well within the requirements for the active longitude for the Royal, but the goalposts had moved, of course. So this time, Harrison now had to hand over his designs to other clockmakers to prove that it wasn't just a lucky fluke and that someone else could replicate his work. So he complied. And the replica version, known as K1, that went on one of Cook's voyages and again performed brilliantly.
What a legacy.
So it really was starting to show that timekeepers could be developed for use at sea. And after Harrison's death in 1776, other clockmakers took his ideas and developed it into what became known as the marine chronometer. And this really became an essential part of navigation in the 19th century.
Yeah, absolutely amazing story, isn't it? There were some incredible human beings telling this story.
Yes, yes. So you've got Harrison busy working on these timekeepers, but here at the observatory, there were other people busy working away on longitude as well. And their main output was this book. Now, it may not look like very much, this book of numbers, but this is the Nautical Almanac. This gives you the predicted position of the moon every 3 hours, every day for the year ahead.
Crumbs.
And so to do all this maths, the Astronomer Royal Neville Maskelyne sent out data to lots of human computers all around the country. Some of them were women as well. So they sort of beavered away, worked, did all the number crunching, sent it back to Greenwich, and then this was published and given to mariners to use with a newly invented instrument called the sextant. So Harrison gets all the fame, but there are so many other people working as well.
Yes, there were, including, as you've just said, the female, the lady computers, as they were called.
Yeah.
Very much like we've just learned that they were at NASA putting men on the moon. Lady computers. There were lady computers here before then.
It's a very long history, definitely.
And they are unsung, largely, until next year you're going to be doing a thing about it.
Yes, so next year is 350 years since our foundation. We're planning lots of events, and we really want to draw out some of these hidden histories and acknowledge people who contributed so much to astronomy and timekeeping.
Because there clearly were women working very hard in this science as well, but we've never really heard their stories.
Sure, and even with the instrument making as well, they're often the wives of the instrument makers busy behind the scenes doing the accounts, working with the apprentices. So it's very much a family business.
Well, look at Flamsteed's widow, who you were telling us about.
Yes.
When he died, she wanted to take those clocks home because she felt they were his legacy, his personal legacy.
Very much.
Brilliant, brilliant, thank you. And Louise, this is the Great Equatorial Telescope. It's huge.
It's
magnificent. It looks wonderful. What does it do?
So this telescope really marks the transition from astronomy to astrophysics. Most of the telescopes on this site were used for astronomy and navigation, so they were fixed in position on a meridian. But this one can swing around, it can track stars across the sky, and it moves parallel to the Earth's equator. That's why it's called the Equatorial Telescope. So it's still aligned on a north-south line. We've got our North Pier over here. But if you attach a clockwork drive to it, you can keep it moving in sync with the stars for several hours. And that was perfect for astrophotography in the 1890s.
1890s was about when it was brought here?
Yes, because sometimes the exposure times were 3 hours or more just to capture a really faint gas cloud.
How incredible. So everything moves. Is this the one where historically they say that you can just prod it and it'll move? It is so finely balanced.
Exactly. And that's true for many telescopes. You want to sort of minimise any friction and move as smoothly as possible.
Absolutely. So obviously the beautiful big onion dome retracts, presumably with electricity nowadays.
Thankfully, yes.
Yeah, there isn't a man who has to sort of clockwork do it.
Not these days, no. So part of it opens and then it swivels around so you can see most of the sky.
Gosh. And people come here, I know it's not used for research now, it's more of a tourist place, isn't it? But sometimes you hold special evenings where people can look through it and see Venus quite clearly.
That's right. We have our Evenings with the Stars events where you can have a talk by an astronomer. They'll talk about the telescope, and subject to the weather and dome conditions, we can open up and see different things, whether it's the moon or the planets. And these are really popular events, especially on Valentine's Day.
Oh, is that a fact? Yeah.
Yes.
And we're very lucky it's still here and still so intact, because didn't you have to take it apart, or at least take some of it away during the war, for instance?
That's right, yes. The Astronomer Royal was very worried about bomb damage, so the lens, 28 inches across, was taken out and stored for safety. It was reunited with the main optical tube after the war, and then the telescope was moved down to Sussex for a few years for some work, and then it's come back.
It's come back here, so it's home.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm very proud you must be of it.
Yes.
It's an incredible thing, isn't it? It's wonderful to look at because it's so physical, so big.
It's so Victorian, isn't it?
Yes, it really is.
It really is.
Yeah. Steampunk almost.
Yeah.
But it is very sophisticated too and still works.
Yes, thankfully, yes.
I know a huge part of its work over the years has been looking at double stars. Why is that good at it? And what are double stars?
Sure, so these are two stars that appear to orbit around each other. And if you use a telescope like this, you can measure the angle between those two stars. And from that, you can work out how long it takes them to orbit. And from that, you can then work out their mass. So you're really starting to build up a picture of what the stars are made of, what they look like. And that's all thanks to new technologies like photography and these bigger and better telescopes.
So how long has this been looking at double stars?
It was used for around 30 or 40 years. And then by that stage, it was becoming less less of a focus of interest for the observatory, and then that's why the programme stopped.
Yeah, and as I've been saying throughout, we look back in Greenwich at the history of astronomy, of timekeeping and of the meridian and all of that. But looking forward, what sort of work is the Royal Observatory doing and the Astronomers Royal nowadays?
We're very much focused on astronomy education. So we work with school groups and special educational needs groups, and we're trying to really encourage the next generation of astronomers and technical specialists who will keep on asking those big questions, just like astronomers used to do in centuries past.
And in terms of astrophysics, what else are you looking at?
We have our Annie Maunder astrographic telescope, which is a new modern telescope, and we're hoping to make that available to student researchers who can maybe use it for their dissertation work. So maybe we can try and start to rebuild some of those research ideas.
And make new findings.
Potentially, yeah.
So this is the Prime Meridian.
Yes.
This is where time starts and begins and ends, I suppose.
Yep.
And I'm walking, you must have had so many people do this. I mean, this is just thrilling walking along it. I'm walking along the Greenwich Meridian, GMT. This is time. And I'm sorry to do this, but I'm going to do that. Because everybody must do this.
Yep.
Half of me is in the Western Hemisphere, which is that side.
Correct.
And the other half of me is in the Eastern Hemisphere and that side. And this is the only place you can really do that in the world.
It's pretty special. It was defined by the instrument behind us in the building, the Airy Transit Circle. And yeah, we have all these places listed with all their coordinates, east and west, and it's an absolute magnet for our visitors.
I'll bet. I mean, this is thrilling. I don't know why it's so thrilling, but it really is, because you're walking along the path of history to a certain extent as well, aren't you? Right now going past, here we are at Greenwich, which is 0 degrees. And that is quite amazing to be here. And to be standing here. What does it mean to you?
It's really quite humbling because, this would go sort of halfway around the planet, and yet we're just here on this tiny fraction, but this is where it was really defined.
Yeah, and if you look out, you see, I mean, that is, as I said, this is where time slices the world up just a little bit, carves a niche in it, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
People must come from all over the world to do this.
Yeah, we have about 600, 700,000 visitors a year from all around the world. It's a real sort of touchstone place.
And you, as a scientist yourself, you did astrophysics, didn't you?
Yes.
You're an astrophysicist. I mean, even this, as you say, is humbling. It's so important. It's such a piece of history, isn't it?
It really is. And when you think of all the people, the work that they did, it was really hard work, quite repetitive and dull, but it was so important, and it's still underpinning our lives now.
And you get that when we walk over here and you start to see the incredible view from this place. And this is your terrace, and I can understand why you love coming here, maybe with a bit more sunshine.
Yes.
But what is amazing to me is the way old London, old Greenwich, all of these ancient institutions meet the new over there, those amazing skyscrapers, and some of them very recognisable. In fact, in a way, we are lucky that there isn't too much greenery on the trees, because you can see your way right up there. In between various buildings, you can see St Paul's.
And we have the Shard.
The Shard.
The Gherkin, the sort of cone-shaped one with the black and green sort of swirl. There's the squished walkie-talkie as well. You have the cheese grater.
I know.
They're all there.
Wonderful names. And you were telling me earlier that, I mean, Greenwich, all of this, everything we see on this side of the river was sort of built because it was important that science figure out how to help the seafarers get across the world. It was important to commerce and to world travel. And it still is today.
Yes, absolutely. It's still very much reflected in the architecture. So we have science for improving navigation, for better trade, better profit. But now we have this sort of commercial district, Canary Wharf, with all the skyscrapers and the banks and the insurance companies. It's a continuation of that story.
It is, isn't it? And what is amazing about this place is that it isn't just about visiting the past. It isn't just about looking backwards. It is, I mean, there's a lot of very important astronomy going on still by Astronomers Royal, looking forward, maybe looking out into space too.
Yeah, we're very much a museum and an astronomy education centre now. So we have lots of events and workshops. We are the home of London's only planetarium, so where you can really see what the night sky looks like. So it's a very special and unique place.
And for you, I mean, you were telling me that you were an astrophysicist. What brought you here in the end?
I just love that sense of history and authenticity, the fact that this is such a globally significant place. Every time you look at a watch or check a globe, it's all based on Greenwich.
Yes.
It's all the stuff that happens here, all the people who lived and worked here, and it's just so special and important.
It's those human stories, isn't it, as well? The people who worked on all of this were human beings with their own private stories.
Yeah.
And they looked out on a very different landscape, I
Yes.
suppose, in olden days.
Yeah.
And now this isn't the home of the Royal Astronomers anymore. They've moved.
That's
They've
right.
moved on.
It's an honorary title now.
But you keep their legacy
Yes,
going.
yes.
Yeah. And it's absolutely fabulous. You must be very proud.
Absolutely. And I hope we can inspire the next generation of astronomers and specialists as well.
Thank you so much for showing me around. It really is the most fabulous place, but I'm always more interested in the people, and I think the people who have worked here in the past and who continue the work, and you continuing as well, it's all part of a wonderful, wonderful story. Thank you so much for telling us about it.
Thank you for coming.
Can't take my eyes off the view.